These 2-ingredient faux gingerbread cookie ornaments are simple, classic, and enduring. I've seen a lot of different cookie ornament recipes recently, and there's always some kind of salt dough or bake time involved, and we really don't need to do any of that. All your ornament needs is to be sturdy and to smell good. And to do that, you actually only need 2 ingredients: applesauce and cinnamon. For this craft, you'll also want some of your favorite cookie cutters, some parchment paper, and a rolling pin. Making these cookies is simple, and the dough is non-toxic, so this is a great activity for the whole family. To make the dough, the first thing you want to do is put all of your cinnamon into a bowl and slowly begin adding applesauce until you've formed a dough. Now, you're not going to eat these, so you don't have to use nice cinnamon. You can even use expired cinnamon. Free up your spice cabinet for newer, more potent spices. You can also use any applesauce that you have as long as it's smooth. Now, I don't have any exact measurements for you. And my mom, who taught me this recipe, says trying to measure this by volume is just asking for trouble. This recipe needs to be put together by touch. So I'm just going to tell you that we used 18 ounces of cinnamon and a little more than half of a 48-ounce jar of applesauce. Now, what you're looking for is a Play-Doh-like texture that gives but doesn't crack when you press into it with your thumb. If it cracks and crumbles when you try to roll it, it's not done yet, and you need to add a little more applesauce. It's better to add slowly and spend a little more time mixing than to have to add more cinnamon to a too liquidy dough. I find that a good indication that this dough is done is when it's impossible to mix by spoon and you have to go in with your hands for the final mixing pass. Once you have your big ball of dough, roll it out to about a 1/4 inch thickness. This dough is extremely easy to roll out. It has no elasticity because there's no flour in it. It really just feels and rolls like Play-Doh. It's okay if the edges crack, but if those cracks really start creeping into your round, you probably need to add a little bit more applesauce. It's okay to scoop it all back into your bowl, mix in some more applesauce, and try again. This dough isn't very sticky, but if you do find it sticking to your pin, just wipe as much of the dough off as you can and return to rolling. It's much less likely to stick to a clean pin. Now, once you have it rolled out, here comes the fun and honestly really satisfying part. Go ahead and go in with your cookie cutters. We're going for a fall/winter theme with our choices, including some leaves and trees, some mason jars, some houses, and this little dress that I'm going to restyle as an apron when we decorate. If you're doing this activity with children, you might pick animal or people shapes. This dough also behaves well with plunger stamp style cookie cutters, and if you can get your hands on any of those little pie crust cutters with the stamp imprints, these also make for great decorations and gift tags. When I make homemade gifts that are consumable, like holiday cookies or a trail mix or fruitcake, the type of gifts for coworkers or teachers or neighbors, I like adding a little something like these that's simple to make, has a classic look to fit with most seasonal decor, and will last longer than any baked good. If you're going to hang these on a tree, use them as personalized gift tags, or add them to a garland, don't forget to take a straw and poke holes now before they dry. If you forget, you can go in with a drill or Dremel, but they might shatter if you try to get holes in them after they have solidified. So it's best to poke the holes now. Now, I did say this was an all ages craft activity, but here's where the age of the decorator is going to determine how you proceed from here. If you're making these with small children who are still developing their fine motor control skills, consider providing them with sequins, glitter glue, small buttons, and other tiny items that they can use to decorate their cookie shapes. When working with small children, it's best to use larger cookie cutters and to decorate your cookies while they're still wet and soft. This way, the children can simply press their decorative items into the dough. No hot glue required. Make sure that whatever decorations you provide to them are thinner than the cookie that you've cut out, and then let them go wild. Once the children have finished decorating, leave these out to dry for 2 or 3 days, then hang them on strings and they're good to go. Now for older children and adults, we're going to get a little fancier. We're going to let these dry for a few days, and once they're hard, we're going to break out the spackle and decorate these like cookies. While you can use royal icing to decorate these, there's no meringue involved with spackle, and I actually find it less prone to cracking after drying. So these ornaments store better over longer periods of time if you use spackle. Spackle does dry a little off-white, so if you'd like, you can mix in some white paint to keep that bright white color, but don't worry about it too much. If you want color, you can use paint to tint the spackle, but unless you have high intensity pigments, you end up with a lot of pastels, which is great if those are the colors you want. Otherwise, consider something like food coloring paste, which is made for coloring large amounts of white frosting without that frosting lightening the color beyond recognition. Now, this is the one craft expense you might need to invest in for this project. You'll need some icing tips and piping bags that you will not use for food again after this project. These are now spackle tips and spackle bags. You can buy them in a kit, or you can purchase a single tip or two from your local craft store. I only use 2 myself, a small round tip and a small star tip for texture. If you do use a pastry bag and icing tips and plan on using more than one tip, don't forget a coupler. The coupler lets you swap out icing tips mid-bag without having to take everything out and dump out all the icing. They're a great tool, and I highly recommend them for any decorating experience. When you're ready to decorate, place your coupler in your piping bag, put on your first icing tip, and then fill the bag with spackle. Now, if you're an experienced cookie decorator, you'll notice there are a few things different with spackle when compared to icing. First, you're not going to be able to get your flooding icing. You get one texture, and that texture is light and full of air holes. It won't pipe on as cleanly as perfectly calibrated royal icing might, but it does well enough, and when used in moderation, creates a really homey and rustic feel. As long as you're keeping a clean tip, that is, wiping the tip down as you go to keep spackle from building up and messing up your lines, you'll still get a pretty faithful defrosting finish. And unlike with cookies, most people are not going to be holding these ornaments up to their face and putting them in their mouth. So most people won't notice really little tiny air bubbles or holes in your lines. When you're coming up with decorating ideas and trying to figure out how you would like to ice your cookies, I always think it's best to look up some ideas online first. You can also trace your cookie cutters and do some sketches to figure out what kinds of simple lines and decorations you can use to get the design of your cookie across. When decorating gingerbread cookies, my approach is very simple. I like to use lines to highlight outlines and major details. I prefer limiting my palette to white and emphasizing details with texture and sprinkles. I used sanding sugar on these, but if you're worried about attracting pests with sugar, you can use glitter instead. If you're lucky enough to live near a large craft store, some stores even sell fake sanding sugar for imitation food, like these ornaments. Here are a few techniques that I use to create these simple cookie ornaments. Now, this is clearly a pine tree, and one of the most beautiful things, in my opinion, about pine trees in the winter is how their boughs collect snow. So, in order to create that texture, I put big globs of spackle onto a single bough, then used a slightly wet paintbrush to pull the spackle into this feathery, streaky sort of texture. It might take a little practice to figure out exactly how wet your brush should be, but once you figure it out, it starts to go pretty fast. Go back and forth between the different boughs to create a layered look with your globs and feathering. At the end, you create this really cool 3D textured pine tree. You can leave it as is when you're done, or you can cover it with a little bit of sanding sugar for a bit of extra sparkle. We've also got these leaves, and leaves are really simple to me. You can give them an outline if you'd like, but what's really important for leaves, again in my opinion, are the veins. I did these very simply and just traced the veins on the leaf, then followed with sanding sugar. This is simple, elegant, and reads very well from a distance. If you have to create a lot of them for a garland, this is a good design for that. Getting into a slightly more complicated technique, we have this dress that I'm going to turn into an apron. This one's going to use two colors, white and our accent color, green. First, I'm going to go in and trace the bib and skirt of the apron, leaving room to create the strap that goes around the neck and the strap that goes around the waist. Now there's no flooding icing available, so I did have to fill and then pat down with wet fingers. I was a little nervous at first, but damp fingers and a light touch goes a long way when you're working with spackle, and it's pretty easy to get an even surface. Once these are dry, you can go back in with your accent color and add the strap around the neck and an untied waist tie. I really love reimagining cookie shapes. You can always buy a new cookie cutter, but this is really the only way to get something that is a unique creation to your household. Plus, I have been informed that there is a finite amount of cookie cutters that you can fit in one kitchen. I'm not sure what that number is yet, but reusing shapes that I already have will keep me from finding out the hard way. The mason jar is where things are going to get a little bit different from your standard cookie decorating experience. You can take a bench knife, a palette knife, or a frosting scraper like this one, scoop up a little bit of spackle, a little goes a long way, and evenly spread the frosting across the cookie. You don't have to worry how it looks because we're going to add some finishing touches around the edges and the top. So just try to make sure that you get it covered with a single thin layer. Once you have that layer, go in with sanding sugar just over the part of the jar where the glass would be. Then go in for the jar lid. A star tip helps with this, but if you don't have one, you can make small thin lines to imitate the jar texture with a round tip. I really like the way that the star tip looks, and I think it's a little bit easier to do. Once that's done, you can go in and create your jar label by making a rectangle in the middle of the jar space. Then outline the rest of the jar. Now you have a little mason jar that looks like it's full of some sort of sparkly holiday goodie. Later, if you'd like, you can come back and add writing on the label for the contents of your jar. This one is particularly good for gift tags because there's space for a name. You can get a little bit cutesy with your labels and hand out ornaments of jars full of wintry goodness by adding whimsical labels like First Snow or Cheer or Jolliness. The most classic piece is probably the house. And who doesn't love a good gingerbread house? I also use sprinkles to delineate snow from house details. So everything that was going to have sanding sugar on it to indicate snow, I put down first. So these big drippy loopies on top that go across the roof and over the top of the chimney and along the windowsills, those all went down first and then had sanding sugar dumped all over them. Then I went back and added outlines for the windows, the walls, and the door. If you want to get really fancy with your house, you can cut your windows and door out while the dough is still wet. But like I said earlier, these are ornaments and not actual cookies that people will be bringing to their face and eating. So your real aim is to just make a picture that reads quite well from far away. I think just the icing lines read just fine. Leave your spackle to dry for at least a day, and when that's done, you have your cookies. Once the spackle has dried, they'll still be a little bit fragile, so you don't want to squish these closely together in storage. Like most holiday ornaments, they do best wrapped in paper. If you're careful when wrapping and unwrapping your ornaments, most paper lasts basically forever. I made these with my mom for the first time when I was a toddler, And that particular ornament gets unwrapped and put on my grandfather's Christmas tree and taken down and put up in the attic every year. I'm 32 years old now, so that ornament has been around for a long time. As far as hanging goes, a standard loop with a piece of string finishes these rustic little cookies off. I think it's a bit funny to use baker's twine as the string. It's just a little joke. You can also add your little ornaments to a garland. We made an orange and cinnamon garland this year, stringing them together with these dehydrated orange rounds for a very country cottage decoration feel. I think they're going to be beautiful around the office, and every time we walk past, we'll get the invigorating sense of orange oil and cinnamon. These are also relatively inexpensive to make, and I would be very comfortable using them as decoration for an outside tree or wreath. The squirrels might get to your oranges, but I've learned that squirrels eating your outside decorations, whether those be landscaping or physical ornaments, that's just a fact of life if you live near squirrels. It's their yard. You just get to enjoy it sometimes too. Thanks for joining us today. If you make this craft, be sure to share it with us. We'd love to see it. Tag us at Mother Earth News Mag on Instagram or Facebook, and send pictures to letters@motherearthnews.com. I promise we read that email. We'd also like to hear the ways that you and your family make the holidays more sustainable. How do you show the people in your community that you value them without creating waste or spending money on stuff? Need more ideas for homemade gifts? Mother Earth News subscribers have full access to Janice Cox's Natural Beauty from Home course, where she shares some simple homemade recipes for bath bombs, face creams, and other customizable beauty care and body products. Like Janice always says, if you can eat it, you can use it for skincare. Her recipes are a lot like this craft. The ingredients are simple, and you probably already have them in your kitchen cabinet. Happy holidays, and thank you for spending time with us at Mother Earth News this year. Until next time, don't forget to love your mother.